Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
It was one of those autumn mornings when London seemed to hesitate between waking and sleep. A pale drizzle hung in the air, turning Baker Street's traffic into a string of dim, lantern-blotted ghosts. Within, the fire had been coaxed into a reluctant glow, and the odour of damp wool rose gently from the rug before the hearth. Dr. John Watson, lately returned from an early round at his practice, set his hat upon the stand and warmed his hands at the blaze, his thoughts idling somewhere between the commonplace and the curious, as they often did in that sitting-room. Holmes, that tireless engine of inference, had installed himself near the window, with his violin cradled but unplayed, the bow balanced across his knees like an untaken decision. He had not yet spoken that morning. When his silence lengthened, Watson recognized the symptom of a mind coiled upon itself, hungry for the stimulus of an insoluble problem. It arrived at 9:15 with the crisp hammering of a carriage on wet stones and a bell pull so urgent that Mrs. Hudson's footsteps hurried of their own accord. The gentleman who entered carried the sort of authority that precedes a name. He was tall but spare, his coat dark and glossy as a raven's wing, the silver in his hair worn like an emblem rather than a surrender. The rain had freckled his shoulders and left unseemly marks upon kid gloves, too carefully fitted for ordinary errands. His right hand gripped a parcel swathed in oilcloth, his left a folded copy of that morning's Times, whose headline Watson had glanced at but not yet digested. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" the stranger asked, and though the question was formal, the voice revealed a man used to issuing orders and having them obeyed. Holmes inclined his head, but did not rise. "Pray be seated. You will find the chair nearest the fire the least inhospitable." His grey eyes had performed their swift inventory and seemed satisfied with what they had taken. "You have come from Westminster, I think, and by way of St. Martin's Lane. Your cabman drove hard, and you tipped him too well." The newcomer's brows drew together, only to lift again in the peculiar amazement which Holmes's opening volleys invariably provoked. "I came at once," he said shortly. "I am Sir Reginald Averill of Averill House. The Home Secretary is my brother-in-law. Scotland Yard has a sergeant on the matter already. They will not thank me for coming to you, but I cannot leave it to official stupidity." "Then it is as grave as your coachman believed," Holmes murmured. "Put down the paper, Sir Reginald, and let us have the parcel." Sir Reginald hesitated, another small and telling sign, Watson noted, and then placed the oilcloth upon the table between them. With a care that suggested reverence or fear, he unwrapped it to reveal a book of some antiquity, a King James Bible, quarto, bound in black morocco, its edges gilt and its spine frayed from generations of pious handling. Across its foredge and spreading in marbled veins into the paper was an ugly stain the colour of rusted cherry. Even before Watson drew a breath, the copper tang of it reached him. "Blood," Sir Reginald said unnecessarily. His throat seemed to constrict upon the word. "This was found open upon the lectern of St. Catherine's in Lambeth at 7 o'clock this morning. The sexton discovered it when he came to rake the furnace. He also discovered—" He swallowed hard. He discovered the Reverend Mr. Gideon Fisk, our vicar, lying dead at the foot of the chancel steps. Ah! Holmes's fingers, long and nervous, hovered over the margins without touching the page. And Scotland Yard, with the full weight of its celebrated judgment, has already selected a villain. They have the curate under guard, Mr. Nathaniel Brooke. He is a young man, earnest to folly, and now the talk of the parish. There was a quarrel, ridiculous, about a matter of accounts for the alms fund. The vicar dismissed the parish clerk last week, and the clerk swore he would make it known that money had gone missing. Mr. Brooke sought to defend the vicar's name, and by doing so hotly, has made himself appear the more likely. Appearances, Holmes murmured, are draughts easily swallowed and rarely nourishing. Watson took the Bible gently and noted that it had been left open at the prophet Hosea. The stain had seeped across both pages, blotting the left column and embracing like a muddy tide a handful of verses upon the right. But one verse had been underlined in pencil, not in blood, precise and recent. For I desired mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. He read it aloud. Yes, Sir Reginald said heavily. The Yard considers that a message from the murderer, or else the morbid scribbling of a guilty conscience. They have sent for inked impressions of fingerprints, they have measured the distances, they have questioned the sexton and all the vergers. But they have not found Mr. Fisk's keys, which he always carried on a ring of iron. Nor have they found the parish ledger for alms, which he kept locked in the vestry desk. The vestry desk is open, the ledger is gone. "Tell us of Mr. Fisk," Watson prompted, "for a clergyman's life is often a parish's mirror, and a mirror shows what it must." "A widower," Sir Reginald replied. 48 last spring, a plain man, but not unliked. He had a zeal for temperance and a notion to reform, which endears a man to a certain type and makes him a trial to another. He was devoted to my sister's household. My niece, Miss Eleanor Averill, sings in the choir. Mr. Fisk shepherded her through her grief when she lost her mother 2 years ago. He was a constant guest at our table. His enemies, if enemies he had, were the sort one calls respectable until tested. "Respectability," Holmes said, "is a garment, often cut to cover a stain. Pray continue." "There has been talk," Sir Reginald went on reluctantly, "of some impropriety in the arms. The dismissed clerk, Huggins, is a sour fellow, given to whispers. He and the sexton drink together on a Saturday night, and know more of each other's faults than is healthy. The bishop's steward was to audit the parish books next week. Mr. Fisk was impatient of such oversight. He said the poor want bread, not arithmetic." Watson looked again at the marred page. Mercy and not sacrifice, a charitable motto or a reproach? He glanced up to find Holmes studying not the Bible, but the man who had brought it, in whom a moral distress warred with indignation. "You spoke of your niece," Holmes said gently. "Where is she now?" "At Averill House," Sir Reginald replied. "We could scarcely keep the news from her. She begged to be allowed to come with me. I refused." "Eleanor?" He paused, and in that pause Watson caught the faintest shiver of something more than familial concern. She was exceedingly fond of Mr. Fisk's sermons. He took an interest in her drawings. She has a talent for design. He encouraged it. Holmes rose at last and moved to the mantel, as if the decision to engage had released him from some invisible restraint. "Sir Reginald, you have done wisely to come. The Yard's appetite for a ready culprit is not in doubt, nor is its digestion. Before they close their jaws upon Mr. Brooke, we shall take the liberty of examining St. Catherine's." Sir Reginald expelled a breath he had been holding since he entered. "Then you will come at once?" "In 10 minutes, Holmes said. "Watson, your boots." "A church is a stage upon which London has performed for centuries. I should like to see where it forgot its lines last night." As Watson turned to obey, he could not suppress a final glance at the Bible. The blood had caught in the crease near the spine and dried there in a thin, dark ridge, as if it had flowed with deliberation rather than in panic. He imagined the lectern under its pall of dust, the black stone steps of the chancel, the silent pews like ranks of untried jurors. On such a stage, a murder suggested not the frenzy of a tavern brawl, but the composure of a sacrament misapplied. "Sir Reginald," Holmes added, and his voice grew abstracted, which in him meant acute. One question more. Did Mr. Fisk, so zealous for mercy, keep a pistol? A pistol? The baronet blinked. Good heavens, no. Holmes nodded as if a sum had been made whole. Then we shall ask St. Catherine's to explain what became of the keys, the ledger, and the drop of mud on the third step that does not belong to Lambeth. Come, Watson, the rain will have washed what it can, and left what it must. Thus began, under a sky the colour of dull pewter, and to the sound of bells far off and indifferent, our inquiry into the affair that the papers would soon christen with morbid relish, the case of the blood-stained Bible. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time our cab set us down before St. Catherine's. Sir Reginald led us through the iron gate. A constable admitted us at Holmes's card, and we stepped into a nave cold as a cellar. The lectern stood beneath the chancel arch, the Bible upon it puckered where the blood had stiffened. Holmes did not approach at once. He moved instead to the steps and paused on the third. "Our trifling friend," he murmured. "Watson!" I knelt. On the worn lip of the stone a crescent of earth, darker than Lambeth clay, was pressed into a shallow bruise. Holmes indicated it without touching. "Not street mud," he said. "Garden mould with leaf rot, and here a husk. Yew. One does not tread yew cones on a church step unless one has lately trodden them elsewhere." "The churchyard is ringed with yews," I suggested. "True," he answered, "but their cones are not in the vestry." His gaze went to the door by the choir stalls. A sergeant coughed. "Orders are not to disturb, Mr. Holmes." "Then we shall observe," said Holmes. His eyes had already fixed upon a waxy smear upon the balustrade. He bent with his lens. "Candle drip, greyed by dust," he observed. 3 threads, down slope, a pricket carried slantwise by a left-handed bearer or a right-handed bearer in haste. Sir Reginald had followed us. "You mean there was a service?" "I mean someone who uses the instruments of a service," Holmes replied. "Let us try the vestry." The vestry smelled of matting and brass. The desk stood open, its pigeonholes gaping. A square on the baize showed where a folio had long rested. Near the press of surplices lay a frayed length of cord. Holmes took it up, frowned at a smear upon the floorboard, and pointed to a bruise where a hook had been wrenched free from the inside of the door. "Then the keys were not mislaid by accident," I ventured. "Nor the ledger seized in passion," said he, "order posing as disorder." We returned to the chancel as brisk footsteps approached. Inspector Lestrade came down the aisle. "Holmes!" he cried. "I had hoped to have the curate's confession before your arrival." "My dear Lestrade," Holmes replied, "Providence withholds such luxuries. How fares Mr. Brooke?" "A parson with a temper and a taste for figures," said Lestrade. "He quarrelled with the vicar after choir practice about alms. The sexton, Graves, heard it. The choir boys heard enough. Brooke left in a rage, returned within the hour, and bolted when the lamps were doused." "Graves drinks with the dismissed clerk," Holmes returned. "They will remember too much or too little." Meanwhile our murderer came prepared, a pricket candle, a cord, and some knowledge of locks. He also trod yew mould not native to this floor. Lestrade sniffed. "You make poetry of footprints. What of the Bible?" Holmes approached the lectern now. He turned a corner with his lens. "The ribbon has been replaced by a tidy hand," he said. "Here on the fly-leaf, Watson, your eyes." I read the inscription. "Presented to St. Catherine's Parish by Eleanor Averill, in memory of her mother, May the 12th, 1889. Sir Reginald's face altered. "My niece gave it," he said. "She thought to comfort others as she had been comforted." "A thoughtful spirit," Holmes replied. "Does Miss Averill keep a conservatory?" "A winter garden at Averill House," Sir Reginald admitted. Laurel and Bay and, yes, 2 tubs of you. Just so. Holmes closed his lens. Lestrade, I should like a word with Graves and with Huggins, the dismissed clerk, before noon. You shall have Graves now, said Lestrade, and Huggins when I fetch him, but you will not unsettle my curate. I shall try not to unsettle your case, Holmes returned. Watson, attend to the hands when they speak, not the faces. Graves awaited us in the north transept, a narrow man with a beard. I told the inspector already, he said. Voices after practice, the Reverend and Mr. Brooke. I hears a slam, I locks what I locks, and I goes. At dawn I finds the Reverend at the chancel, and that their book, bleeding over Hosea. You locked what you locked, Holmes repeated. With whose keys? Mine for the outer, said Graves. Vestry and chancel is the Reverend's, or was. And Huggins? Holmes asked. Graves's shoulders hunched. Sour, he muttered. Said there'd be an accounting, sleeping rough, or in the churchyard when I'm soft. He scratched at his beard. Left-handed he is. Holmes's glance flickered to the smear upon the balustrade. You are fond of prickets, Mr. Graves? Even song on saints' days, Graves said. Else we use stubs. Just so, Holmes murmured. You may go, do not leave the precincts. When the sexton had gone, Sir Reginald spoke. Holmes, you look as though some thought had pricked you. It has, he said, but thoughts, like candles, gutter in a draught. Let us see Miss Averil. If mercy rather than sacrifice is the true text here, it was quoted by a hand that wished us to think otherwise. The cab bore us swiftly across Westminster Bridge, its lamps leaving streaks in the fog like strokes of a hurried brush. Sir Reginald sat in silence opposite us, his gloved hands resting upon the ebony head of his cane, though his eyes betrayed a restlessness which neither breeding nor resolve could mask. Holmes, sunk low in his corner, had his fingers steepled and his lids half lowered. Yet I knew, from long familiarity, that his mind was kindling. The faintest tapping of his fingertips upon each other kept pace with the horse's stride, as though his thoughts galloped beside us. Averil House stood in a genteel square of Lambeth, its facade sober and correct, with only a spill of creepers to soften its austerity. Within, the air bore the fragrance of cut yew and laurel, mingled with the faint damp of a conservatory beyond. The butler admitted us at Sir Reginald's word, and presently we were shown into a drawing-room furnished with the careful taste of a family determined never to err toward ostentation. A pianoforte stood by the far window, and at its side, her sketchbook open upon her lap, sat Miss Eleanor Averil. She rose at once upon our entry, the pallor of recent grief marked beneath her eyes, yet unable to dim the quiet dignity of her manner. She was no longer in her first youth, but the refinement of her features and a certain grave sweetness in her expression lent her a beauty of character that impressed itself upon me, even in that solemn hour. She greeted her uncle and then allowed her gaze to fall with undisguised curiosity upon Holmes. Miss Averil, said Sir Reginald, this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. They have kindly agreed to examine the matter which has so cruelly touched us. She inclined her head with composure. You seek to know how Mr. Fiske spent his last days? She asked quietly. Holmes's response was not immediate. He had moved with the silent certainty of a cat toward the conservatory door, which stood ajar. His eyes roved the tiled floor, the potted shrubs, and finally the pair of yew tubs set near the window, their evergreen cones strewn upon the earth. He plucked one, examined it against his cuff, and returned without remark. Only then did he seat himself, bowing faintly. "If you will indulge me," he said, "I should be grateful for your recollections of the Reverend during the last fortnight." Had his spirits altered? Was he troubled? Eleanor's fingers tightened upon her sketchbook. He was troubled, yes, but he would not confide the particulars. He spoke often of mercy, of forgiveness, as though defending himself to some unseen accuser. Her voice faltered, and she turned away a moment. He was very good to me. He encouraged my drawings when others thought them frivolous. He had a vision of the parish as a garden, each soul to be cultivated. I never thought— She broke off, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. Holmes observed her keenly, not with cruelty, but with a surgeon's detachment. Did he ever speak of leaving his post? No, she said firmly. He loved St. Catherine's too deeply. Did he fear Mr. Huggins, the former clerk? She gave a slight shiver. Mr. Huggins is a spiteful creature. He once followed me from the vestry to the gate, muttering that truth would out. Mr. Fiske bade me never heed him. Holmes inclined his head gravely. And Mr. Brooke, the curate? You know him well? Eleanor coloured faintly. Mr. Brooke is earnest, sometimes impetuous, but sincere. He argued with Mr. Fiske only out of loyalty. He believed calumny against the vicar must be met firmly, that is all. Holmes rose. He had been in the room scarcely a quarter of an hour, yet I saw from the slight quickening of his step that his object was attained. He set the yew-cone upon the mantel, where it seemed to reproach the orderly array of family china. "Thank you, Miss Averill," he said. "You have been of service. Pray do not let grief estrange you from your art. In such small labours the truth of a soul often reveals itself." As we returned to the cab, Sir Reginald demanded in a low voice, "Well, Mr. Holmes, what conclusion do you form?" "Conclusion?" Holmes echoed. "No, Sir Reginald. Only a question more pointed than the last. Who underlined that verse? It was not the vicar's hand, nor was it Miss Averill's. The graphite is new, the stroke hasty but firm, by one accustomed to figures. We must discover whose hand it was that sought to sermonize with another man's death." The cab rattled us towards Scotland Yard, where Lestrade awaited with a pinched impatience. He thrust a bundle of papers at Holmes. "Statements," he said. "From Graves, from the choir boys, from Brooke himself. All tell the same tale, an argument, threats, then silence. That Bible is his confession, written in blood." Holmes leafed through the documents with disdainful speed. "Your curate writes a round and clerical hand," he observed. "The pencil stroke in Hosea is angular, financial. Look more to your clerk Huggins, Lestrade. There is your cipher, not your confessor." "Bah!" cried Lestrade. "Huggins is a pauper with gin for blood. He could not contrive such a scene." "On the contrary," Holmes replied softly, "he could contrive nothing simpler. Remove the ledger, strike the vicar, daub the book, and let the curate swing. That is not genius, Lestrade. It is spite." "But we have no ledger," Sir Reginald interposed. "No keys." "Then let us find them," said Holmes, "for I promise you they are closer than you imagine, and until they are discovered, this Bible is but a mask behind which the true face still waits." And with that, his eyes glittering with the spark I knew too well, Holmes signalled me toward the door, eager as a hound on a scent. The day was advancing into a grey noon when we quitted Scotland Yard, Holmes's features sharpened by the peculiar brightness of a man who scents order in apparent chaos. The papers Lestrade had surrendered were clutched beneath his arm, though I knew his mind had already digested their marrow and discarded the husks. He led me wordlessly into the nearest hansom, gave the driver a direction so low that I scarcely caught it, and then sank back into his peculiar silence, eyes half closed, lips moving faintly as though rehearsing a chess problem played upon some inner board. At last he spoke, his voice abrupt. "Watson, have you remarked the curious economy of our murderer? He wastes nothing, neither time nor gesture nor symbol. The Bible was not a flourish of fanaticism, it was a deliberate mask. The ledger was not mere theft, but erasure, the wiping of an account. The keys were not an afterthought, but the very spine of the plan. A man so precise does not scatter clues without intent. I answered that the affair seemed precise indeed, yet still dark to me. Dark, yes, but not impenetrable. The inscription in the Bible gave us Miss Averill, the pencil gave us figures, the U-mould gave us a garden not belonging to St. Catherine's. Now, where does precision and resentment meet? In a dismissed clerk, accustomed to reckonings and deprived of his livelihood, Huggins becomes increasingly vivid. Let us see if we cannot lend him substance. The cab drew up in a dreary street south of the river, where laundry flapped damply between crooked chimneys and children in tatters skirmished with sticks across the gutter. Holmes mounted the steps of a mean lodging-house whose door hung upon a rusted hinge. A slatternly woman appeared, wiping her hands upon her apron. "Mr. Huggins lodges here?" Holmes asked. "When he pays," she replied sourly, "and when he doesn't, he sleeps where he may. He's no favourite of mine. Went out yesternight and has not returned." Holmes's eyes glittered. "Did he carry anything?" "A roll of papers under his arm," she said, "and a lantern. Said he would light his own path if no one else would." Holmes thanked her with a sovereign that softened her tone. We entered the dim passage, the landlady leading us to a narrow room. The mattress lay tumbled, the air rank with gin. Upon a table rested a scattering of bills and a broken quill. Holmes bent, lifted a scrap from beneath the table, and handed it to me. It was a half-sheet torn from a ledger, the ruled lines familiar. Figures marched across it in a neat, angular hand, at the bottom a smear the colour of rust. "Blood, Watson," Holmes said softly. Not spilt in rage, but dabbed upon a finger. He sought to try the look of it before writing his morbid homily upon Hosea. "Observe the ink well, bone dry, pencil alone served him. Huggins rehearsed his crime here." I shuddered, for the paper bore the vicar's name, and beneath it sums added and subtracted, ending in a deficit inked heavily, as though to nail down guilt. Holmes pocketed the scrap and turned to the window. From the sill he plucked a small cone, brown and polished. "Again the yew," he murmured. "It clings to him like his shadow. He has no garden. Where then did he gather these tokens? He haunts the Averill Conservatory, I think, as well as the parish. It is a curious intersection, Watson. The niece presents the Bible, the vicar cherishes her devotion, the clerk festers with envy, and the Bible returns to us steeped in blood. I suspect Miss Averill has played a more central role in his bitterness than even Sir Reginald supposes." We quitted the lodging-house and returned to the cab. Holmes gave another order, and soon we were conveyed to the river, where Lambeth Market spilled its refuse and cries upon the cobbles. Holmes prowled among the stalls until he came upon a bookseller with a tray of second-hand volumes. He examined them idly before turning with sudden interest. "Have you seen a tall fellow stooped, with a beard like uncombed bristles, offering books these 2 days?" The man scratched his head. "Last night, He pressed me with a heavy tome, account book, it seemed, bound in leather, locked. I would not buy it. He cursed me and went his way." "The parish ledger," Holmes murmured to me. "He dares not keep it, nor can he profit by it. He will seek a purchaser who knows its weight, but a locked ledger speaks of theft as loudly as a shout. He has tethered himself to his crime." It was dusk before we returned to Baker Street. Holmes, with a vigour born of certainty, spread our discoveries upon the table. "Consider, Watson, a verse underlined in haste, a ledger missing, a vicar slain, a curate accused, all point in one direction, yet one element resists." He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "The absence of the vicar's keys." Why keep them if the ledger was the true object? Unless the keys themselves open not the vestry alone, but another door, another secret, still unrevealed. At that moment, the bell rang violently. Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Lestrade, his face a mixture of triumph and irritation. He laid a bundle on the table. It was a ring of iron keys, wrapped in a rag still damp from the Thames. "Found by a waterman near Blackfriars," said Lestrade. "Your clerk has not run far. We shall have him by midnight." Holmes regarded the keys with a peculiar satisfaction, yet he said only, "Then pray let us be in attendance, Lestrade. I think Mr. Huggins is ready to supply us with more than one answer, if we but ask the proper question." And as I looked upon the keys, still glistening from the river, I felt the case tightening about us, each clue like a rivet in some unseen structure, inexorably building toward a revelation whose shape I dared not yet imagine. The ring of keys, lying cold upon the table, seemed in that moment to command the room more fully than Lestrade himself. Their iron teeth, still slick from the Thames, caught the glow of the lamp as though reluctant to release the secrets they had once guarded. Holmes did not touch them. He circled the table slowly, hands clasped behind his back, head bent in that bird-like fashion which foretold the tightening of his thoughts. "You will have him by midnight, you say?" he asked at last, his voice so soft it might have been mistaken for indifference. Lestrade straightened. "A patrol has traced him as far as Southwark. He was seen near the wharves, half drunk and cursing. A sorry dog, Holmes, and scarcely worth your refinements. With the ledger gone and the keys cast into the river, the case is as plain as pudding." Holmes's eyes flicked to him, and there was the faintest glimmer of amusement. "Plain? Yes, too plain. A crime that desires to be obvious must be treated with the utmost suspicion. It is the artifice of the stage, not of life. Have you examined the rag in which these keys were wrapped?" Lestrade frowned. "A bit of sailcloth, nothing more." Holmes bent suddenly, lifted the cloth, and held it to the light. "Observe the fibres, Watson, not the frayed cordage of a wharf, but finer, woven for domestic use. Curtain or upholsterer's lining, I think. Its smell, do you perceive it?" I inhaled. A faint, acrid tang lingered. "Smoke," I ventured. "Precisely. Not the salt of the sea, but the reek of a chimney long uncleaned. Our clerk may haunt the docks, but the cloth that bound the keys has lived nearer to hearth and household. That small contradiction interests me greatly." Lestrade made a dismissive sound. "You'll find riddles in every shadow, Holmes. I'll be content with my prisoner." "Contentment," Holmes replied with a thin smile, "is a luxury I cannot afford." When Lestrade had gone, Holmes seated himself, and for the first time touched the keys. He spread them in a fan across the table, examining each with his lens. "Note, Watson, the vestry key is here as well as the chancel, yet one, smaller, is out of keeping. It bears the mark of a locksmith not employed by the parish, a private commission. Why should the vicar carry such a key with him at all times? What private door demanded his constant vigilance? I confessed I could not imagine. "Nor need you," he said briskly. "It is enough that we ask the question. When a question stands, the answer is never far. We shall accompany Lestrade to Southwark. Huggins will not escape us, but more importantly, he may betray the lock to which this key belongs." The fog had thickened into a clammy shroud by the time we reached the river once more. Lanterns glimmered through the murk like half-drowned stars. At a tavern near the wharf, Lestrade's men had cornered their quarry. We entered to find Huggins slumped upon a bench, his beard matted, his eyes wild with gin and sleeplessness. At the sight of Holmes he spat a curse. "You'll not fix it on me," he growled, pounding the table with a grimy fist. "I never struck him. I wanted only the truth writ down. Brooke, aye, he was the one as thundered at the vicar, not I. Holmes seated himself opposite him with the calm of a man addressing a specimen under glass. And yet the ledger is missing, and the Bible underlined by your hand. The pencil mark is yours, Huggins. Your figures betrayed you. The clerk's face twitched, torn between fear and defiance. I copied what I saw, he muttered. The sums was wrong, aye. The vicar played fast with the arms, and I meant to show it. But murder? No, I found him lying there, stiff already. I touched the blood, aye, I thought to scare Brooke, to make him take the blame, but my hands never struck the vicar, by my soul, never. Holmes leaned forward. You found him already dead, and the keys? I took them, thinking to keep them safe, Huggins stammered. Then I saw the patrols after me, so I cast them off. That's the truth, Mr. Holmes. Holmes regarded him a long moment, then rose. You are a liar, but not of the highest order. Your crime is tampering, not killing. No, Inspector, do not congratulate yourself. The true hand remains unseen. Lestrade, exasperated, demanded what he meant. Holmes turned to me with that familiar gleam of triumph, half concealed. Do you not see, Watson? Huggins blundered into a scene already staged. He lacked the imagination to devise it, though he added his own petty malice. The vicar's death was no accident, no quarrel turned fatal. It was calculated, precise, and veiled beneath Scripture. There is another figure here, someone who possessed both opportunity and subtlety, and I believe the key upon this ring will conduct us straight to that person's door. We departed, leaving Lestrade to quarrel with his conscience and his captive. In the cab, Holmes was once more alive with suppressed energy. Mark me, Watson, the clue lies not in Huggins's squalor, but in the refinement of that extra key. It belongs to a place where appearances matter, where secrets are guarded with ceremony. Before the night is out, we must discover what lock it serves, and when we do, the veil shall lift, and we shall see the face that guided this tragedy with the deliberation of a hand turning the pages of a Bible. I watched him, struck by the certainty that the case was shifting into deeper waters. Each step drew us further from the drunken clerk and closer to an intelligence that had contrived every move. And as the cab rattled toward Baker Street, I confess a chill passed through me, for I could not shake the image of that bloodied verse, proclaiming mercy while concealing murder, as though the very text had been twisted to mock us. Holmes's eyes shone in the dim light, fixed not upon the fog outside, but upon the labyrinth within, from which he alone could hope to lead us. The fog clung to London like a damp curtain as our cab rattled back toward Baker Street, the keys jangling faintly in Holmes's pocket with every turn of the wheel. He sat forward, the brim of his hat low over his brow, the keen light in his eyes betraying the calculations forming behind them. I ventured to ask what lock could demand such secrecy from a clergyman known for plainness. Reflect, Watson, he replied, his voice deliberate. On the vicar's life, as Sir Reginald described it, no gambling, no debts, no military career, to leave behind some skeleton. Yet he carried a private key fashioned by a locksmith apart from the parish. A clergyman has but two domains, his church and his flock. When a third appears, it is almost always connected to confidence or concealment. You suspect some hidden chamber? I asked. Or a hidden trust, said Holmes. We must ascertain what lay behind the Reverend's outward zeal. For even piety, Watson, can be worn like armour. When we reached Baker Street, Holmes did not permit himself rest. He summoned a directory from the shelf, leafed through its pages, and paused with satisfaction. There are but 3 locksmiths in Lambeth with the mark I observed on that key. 2 are long established, their clientele respectable and well accounted for. The third, Mr. Griggs of Mill Lane undertakes odd commissions with less scrutiny. We shall visit him in the morning. I confess my limbs ached for sleep, but Holmes was tireless. He spent the greater part of the night examining the worn ridges of the smaller key with his glass, tracing its cuts upon paper and sketching diagrams with a precision that suggested he already saw the lock before him. Only toward dawn did he permit the fire to sink low and his violin to murmur a restless air while I dozed in my chair. By 8 o'clock we were again abroad. Mill Lane proved a narrow street, pungent with the mingled odours of coal smoke and tanneries. The locksmith's shop was a cluttered cave of iron filings and half-formed latches. Mr. Griggs, a thick-set fellow with soot in his beard, looked up as Holmes entered, with the easy bearing of one come for a purchase. "This key," Holmes said, producing it, "was cut by your hand. I should like to know when and for whom." Griggs turned it over, squinting at the notches. "Aye, I remember, some weeks back. A clergyman, tall, spare, with a black coat. Wanted it in haste, he did. Paid well, too." "Did he say what for?" Holmes asked lightly. Griggs shook his head. "No questions in my trade, but I know the look of a man keeping something locked close. He warned me not to keep a copy, and I never did. My forge remembers well enough without." Holmes's eyes flickered with satisfaction. "And the lock itself, what form?" "A stout cabinet, I'd say. Not a door, too small for that. More the kind used for ledgers or papers." Holmes slipped the key back into his pocket. "You have done us a service, Mr. Griggs. Pray keep your recollections silent for now." Outside in the mist, he turned to me. "A private cabinet, Watson." "That is the heart of the matter. The missing parish ledger may have been a feint. The true book, or bundle of papers, lies behind that lock, and the one who now holds it may fear its exposure more than any gallows." We made straight for Averil House, Sir Reginald receiving us in his library with an impatience barely disguised. He had read of Huggins's arrest in the morning edition and congratulated Holmes on his swift conclusion. Holmes regarded him with cool civility. "I fear the conclusion is not so near as you imagine, Sir Reginald. Mr. Huggins is a meddler, not a murderer. The hand that felled Mr. Fisk is more skilful. Pray tell me, does Averil House contain any locked cabinet that once belonged to the vicar?" Sir Reginald started. "Certainly not. Why should it?" "Because this key," Holmes said, laying it upon the desk, "was cut for his private use, a cabinet of papers, not parish property, for which he required secrecy. And you, Sir Reginald, spoke of his being a constant guest at your table. Was he not equally constant in your library, among your niece's drawings?" The baronet's face tightened. "Eleanor's sketches, yes, he admired them, but he brought no cabinet here." "Surely you do not suggest—" At that instant the door opened quietly, and Miss Averil herself appeared, pale but composed. She had overheard enough. Her gaze fell upon the key, and the blood drained from her cheeks. "You have found it," she whispered. Holmes's voice was gentle, but it carried the force of command. "Miss Averil, there is a cabinet, is there not? And within it lies the truth that cost a man his life." Her eyes flickered between her uncle and Holmes. At last she said, "Come with me." She led us through the hall to a smaller parlour at the rear of the house. Against the wall stood a rosewood cabinet, modest yet finely made. From her pocket she drew a small chain, upon which hung a keyhole cover, delicate and worn. Holmes fitted the iron key, and with a turn the lock yielded. Inside lay a sheaf of papers bound with ribbon. Holmes lifted the bundle and turned the first leaf. It was a series of letters written in a hand more flowing than the vicar's. He read a line or two, his expression unreadable, then closed the folio. "Watson," he said softly, "here is the motive. Not arms, not ledgers, but passion and possession, a correspondence that bound the vicar to Miss Averill in a manner more compromising than any balance sheet. Eleanor's voice broke. He wished to burn them. He said they had been written in weakness, not in sin, but in loneliness. He feared scandal. I begged him to wait, and now he is dead, and the letters remain. Holmes replaced the bundle with care. Who knew of these? She shook her head, tears rising. Only my uncle. I told him when I feared the vicar's distress was too great. He swore to protect us both. Holmes's gaze flicked sharply to Sir Reginald, whose face had become a mask of stone. The silence deepened, filled only by the muffled tick of the clock. I felt the air thicken with a new gravity, as though the case had shifted beneath our feet. Holmes pocketed the key once more. "We must tread carefully, Watson," he murmured as we took our leave. "The blood on the Bible is one thing, but the blood upon a man's honour is another, and it stains more deeply." We stepped once more into the misted street outside Averill House, Holmes striding with long, decisive steps while I struggled to keep pace. He did not speak for several minutes, the fog curling round him as if reluctant to part before a man so intent. At last he halted beneath a gas lamp whose weak flame painted his profile in lines of iron. "Watson," he said, "you perceive now the true peril of this case. The blood-stained Bible was but a stage prop, the ledger a convenient diversion. The real theatre lies within those letters, and the audience is one whose reputation cannot endure a whisper of scandal." "You suspect Sir Reginald?" I asked, lowering my voice instinctively. Holmes's eyes glinted. "Suspicion is too crude a word. Let us say he stands where motive and opportunity meet. He knew of the correspondence, he feared disgrace, and he had both the authority to silence tongues and the strength to act. Yet we must prove, not presume. The mind must be as exact as the key we carry, fitting the lock and no other." He hailed a cab, and we were soon conveyed back to Baker Street, where the familiar rooms received us with their clutter of chemical jars and papers. Holmes flung himself into his chair and lit his pipe, the smoke rising in slow wreaths while his gaze fixed upon the ceiling. I knew better than to interrupt. My role was to wait until the cloud of thought condensed into speech. It was not long. "Consider the sequence, Watson. The vicar, troubled and despondent, keeps the letters in a private cabinet at Averill House. He intends to destroy them. His confidant is Miss Averill, his constant visitor, Sir Reginald. On the night of the crime, he is found slain before the chancel, the Bible open at Hosea, the ledger vanished, the keys gone. Who benefits? Certainly not Brooke, whose ruin was contrived, certainly not Huggins, whose spite lacks subtlety. But Sir Reginald, he secures silence, preserves his niece's honour, and directs suspicion neatly toward others." "But the Bible? Why stain it with blood? Why underline the verse?" I objected. "A theatrical flourish," Holmes replied. "A man of Sir Reginald's station is steeped in Scripture enough to twist a phrase into a mask. It served to distract the yard, to make them sniff at heresy instead of inheritance. Yet such artifices often betray themselves by excess. A criminal who cannot resist the drama of his own crime leaves behind a trail of embellishments." As he spoke, the bell rang sharply. Mrs. Hudson admitted Inspector Lestrade, his expression a mixture of weariness and irritation. He seated himself without ceremony. "Well, Holmes, your clerk has confessed to tampering. Just as you said, he swears he found the vicar dead and sought only to blacken the curate. It may be true, but it leaves us without a murderer. The yard is restless, the newspapers worse. They cry out for an arrest." Holmes regarded him coolly through the haze of his pipe. "And you would offer them Brooke to quiet the noise?" Lestrade bristled. He quarrelled with the vicar, he stormed from the vestry, he had the temper. What more do you require? Evidence, Holmes said sharply, rising to his feet, which you do not possess. Come, Lestrade, you are not a fool. The curate lacks guile. He is a hammer, not a scalpel. No, the hand that struck Mr. Fiske belongs to one who could fashion a narrative with blood and pencil alike, who could wield scripture as a mask. I tell you, the vicar's death was not born of a quarrel, but of calculation. Lestrade shifted uneasily. And who do you name? Holmes's gaze hardened. Sir Reginald Averill. The inspector started. The Home Secretary's brother-in-law? Preposterous. Do you know what you suggest? I know precisely, Holmes returned. But truth is no respecter of pedigree. The key we recovered belongs to a cabinet in Averill House, containing letters which, if made public, would stain his niece's reputation and expose the vicar's weakness. Sir Reginald alone had both knowledge and power to silence the matter at its root. Lestrade muttered an oath, torn between incredulity and reluctant admiration. If you mean to bring this against him, you had best have proof, more solid than letters in a drawer. Holmes smiled thinly. And so we shall. The trap must be baited, and the quarry allowed to spring it himself. You shall assist me, Inspector, whether you will or no. He turned to me then, his eyes alight with the peculiar brilliance that always preceded the decisive stroke. Watson, tomorrow evening there will be a gathering at St. Catherine's, a memorial service for the late vicar. It will be attended by the parish, the choir, and, most notably, by the Averill family. There, in the very place where the crime was staged, we shall reenact its shadow. The Bible will be restored to the lectern, the keys returned to their ring, the verse left open as before. And I shall contrive a circumstance that will compel our culprit to reveal himself. I felt a shiver pass through me. You mean to provoke him into confession? Not confession, Watson, compulsion. A man who believes his crime secure can endure silence, but place him once more upon the stage he built, surround him with the symbols he contrived, and he cannot resist betraying himself. The hand that underlined Hosea will tremble, the tongue that denied guilt will stumble. In such moments the truth leaps forth as flame from tinder. Lestrade shook his head, muttering that Holmes played a dangerous game. Yet I saw in his eyes the reluctant hope that this audacious plan might succeed where his own labours had faltered. When at last the inspector departed, Holmes stood long at the window, the fog pressing against the glass like some grey sea. He spoke almost to himself. Mercy, not sacrifice, that was the text. Yet our murderer offered sacrifice in place of mercy. Tomorrow we shall see whether mercy will at last prevail, or whether the sacrifice must be his own freedom. And as I watched him, his tall frame outlined against the lamplight, I knew we stood upon the brink of revelation. The stage was set, the actors assembled, and the drama of St. Catherine's was about to reach its cruel climax. The following day dawned with a pale, reluctant sun that did little to pierce the fog. The city went about its business in muffled tones, as though even the traffic of the Strand respected the hush surrounding the memorial at St. Catherine's. Holmes spent the morning in restless preparation, rearranging papers, pacing, and sketching curious diagrams upon scraps which he burned almost as soon as they were complete. He spoke little, save to ask me to ensure my revolver was in working order, which I did with a gravity born of long experience. When the hour approached, we took a cab through streets already thronged with parishioners making their way toward the church. St. Catherine's had donned its solemn raiment. Candles flickered along the aisles, their glow refracted by the dim haze of incense. Black crape adorned the chancel, and the lectern stood once more with the Bible upon it, its pages parted at the very verse which had so disquieted us. Holmes had arrived early enough to secure this arrangement. Now he stood in the shadows near the north transept, his eyes moving restlessly across the congregation as they filed in, each face to him a page in some secret volume. Sir Reginald entered with Miss Averill upon his arm, her figure clad in mourning black, her countenance pale yet composed. Their presence drew respectful murmurs. Behind them trailed Lestrade, endeavouring to blend among the parishioners, but as conspicuous as a crow in a dovecote. Holmes gave me the smallest of nods, and I knew the trap was laid. The service commenced with solemn music. The curate, Brooke, ascended the pulpit, his voice earnest but shaken. He spoke of the late vicar's devotion, of his zeal for mercy, of his constancy. The words were fitting, yet, to my ear, carried the tremor of a man under suspicion. As he spoke, my gaze travelled to Holmes, who never lifted his eyes from Sir Reginald. The baronet sat rigid, his lips pressed thin, one hand clenched upon his cane. Miss Averill's eyes were downcast, her fingers twisting a handkerchief with unconscious agitation. When the hymn concluded, Holmes moved silently toward the lectern. The congregation scarcely noticed as he adjusted the great Bible, though I, who knew his ways, understood that every gesture was deliberate. He drew the marker ribbon with ostentation, causing it to flutter down across the stained page, and then, as though by accident, he let slip the ring of keys which clattered upon the chancel step with a metallic echo. The sound sliced through the church like a blade. In that instant I saw Sir Reginald start, his head turning sharply, his eyes riveted to the keys upon the stone. His hand trembled against his cane. Holmes stooped slowly, too slowly, to retrieve them, his movements calculated to prolong the moment. The congregation shifted, whispering. Brooke faltered in his reading. Lestrade watched intently from the nave, his brows drawn. Holmes straightened and let his gaze rest upon Sir Reginald. "How curious," he said, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "The vicar's private keys lost and found again. Perhaps they might tell us who last possessed them." A silence followed, heavy and expectant. Sir Reginald's face had gone white, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words emerged. Instead, he rose abruptly, drawing Miss Averill up with him, and made as though to quit the pew. Holmes's voice cut across the hush, low and imperious. "Sit down, Sir Reginald. The house of God is no place for flight." The baronet froze, every eye turned upon him. Miss Averill uttered a faint cry, imploring him with her glance. For a moment he seemed to wrestle with himself, his jaw working, his chest heaving. Then, with a sudden violence, he slammed his cane against the pew and strode down the aisle toward the chancel. "You presume too much, sir," he thundered. "I came here to mourn my friend, not to be hounded by your insinuations." Holmes regarded him with icy calm. "And yet your mourning takes the form of fear, Sir Reginald. You cannot look upon the Bible without trembling, nor upon the keys without blanching. Why should that be, unless they remind you of what you sought to bury with the vicar?" The congregation gasped. Brooke descended from the pulpit, bewildered. Lestrade stepped forward, uncertain whether to intervene. Sir Reginald's composure cracked. He raised a hand as if to strike Holmes, then let it fall. His voice dropped, hoarse. "You do not understand," he said. "He would have ruined her. He would have dragged her name through the mire. My niece, my sister's child. Those letters, they were poison, written in weakness, but read as scandal. He promised to destroy them, yet he kept them still. And when I learned he meant to confess, to bear all to the bishop, I knew it would be the end of her." A dreadful hush fell. Holmes's face did not soften. "And so you chose to end him instead, to silence a man with scripture and blood, to cloak murder as sacrifice." Sir Reginald's shoulders sagged as though a weight too great had at last broken him. Miss Averil cried out, pressing her hand to her mouth. Lestrade moved forward, but Holmes raised a hand. "One moment more, Inspector. Sir Reginald, the truth is yours to speak. Confess it fully, for only thus may mercy find a place in this house where you sowed death." The baronet's voice shook. I confronted him in the chancel. I begged him to yield me the letters. He refused, saying honesty must prevail, that mercy lay in truth. I lost myself, struck him with the candlestick. When he fell, I thought only of her reputation, her life. I smeared the blood, opened the Bible, underlined the verse, hoping the blame would fall upon the curate or the clerk. I took the keys, cast them into the river, but the stain remains. His head bowed. Lestrade stepped forward at last, placing a hand upon his arm. The congregation stirred with murmurs of horror and pity. Holmes, unmoved, closed the Bible with a firm hand and spoke quietly. "You sought to protect her, Sir Reginald, but mercy cannot be bought with another man's blood. Sacrifice, yes, you offered that, but mercy was denied." And with that, the baronet was led away, his proud figure diminished, while Miss Averil wept silently in her pew. Holmes turned to me, his eyes sombre. "Come, Watson. Our work here is done, though its echoes will linger long in Lambeth. We have witnessed not only a crime, but the tragedy of a man who mistook violence for virtue. It is ever thus. The most dangerous sins are those committed in the name of love." The solemn echoes of Sir Reginald's confession still hung in the air as we stepped from St. Catherine's into the waiting fog. The parishioners had dispersed in uneasy murmurs, some expressing pity, others condemnation, all subdued by the spectacle they had witnessed. Miss Averil had been led away by a neighbour, her face white and stricken, though she bore herself with a composure that suggested the finality of shock rather than collapse. Lestrade, his duty heavy upon him, departed with his prisoner in tow, though he threw Holmes a glance, half grudging, half grateful, as if acknowledging that justice had been served, but at a cost beyond calculation. Holmes remained still a moment on the church steps, his hands clasped behind him, his eyes upon the darkened square. The fog seemed to wrap him like a mantle, and when he at last stirred, it was with a weary air. "Watson," he said, "the law has claimed its portion, but the truth is not yet fully laid bare. There are subtler strands still to be untangled before we may close the ledger of this affair." I looked at him in astonishment. "You cannot mean there is more to discover? Sir Reginald himself has confessed, before half the parish, no less." "Confession," Holmes replied gravely, "is but the opening of a door. We must still see what lies behind it. Consider, my dear fellow, he struck the blow, yes, but does his narrative account for every detail? The letters, the ledger, the clerk's interference, the curate's quarrel, each has its place, yet some threads do not align. Let us return to Baker Street. I must order them afresh." In our rooms, once more, Holmes threw himself into his chair with an intensity that belied his outward fatigue. He spread upon the table the scraps of evidence, the torn page from Huggins's lodging, the stained ribbon from the Bible, the locksmith's tracing of the peculiar key. His long fingers hovered above them as though arranging pieces upon a chessboard. "Reflect, Watson," he said, "upon the singular fact of the missing ledger. Sir Reginald's account makes no mention of it. He cared nothing for parish balances. His sole object was the destruction of those letters, yet the ledger has vanished all the same. Who, then, profited by its removal?" I considered. "Huggins, surely. He confessed to meddling with the blood, to underlining the verse. It was natural he should also seize the ledger, to support his tales of dishonesty. Holmes shook his head. He attempted to sell it, yes, but note this. He offered it in locked form, unable to open it. Had he taken it from the vestry, the desk must have been forced, yet the desk was opened by a key, for no marks of violence were observed, which means Huggins did not take it first. He obtained it after it had already been removed, I started. Then who? Precisely the question. If not Huggins, then someone with access both to the vestry and to knowledge of its worth. Someone who might see in the ledger an instrument of power. Do you not recall the sexton's testimony? Graves locked what he locked, but his loyalty was to Huggins, and he admitted to using the pricket candles, the very weapon Sir Reginald described. There lies a second hand in this matter, Watson, operating in the shadow of the first. A silence fell as I absorbed his meaning. You suggest that while Sir Reginald struck the fatal blow, another crept in afterward to exploit the scene. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Just so. Sir Reginald's confession satisfies the law, but it does not explain the theft of the ledger. That act was not mercy nor sacrifice, but greed. I fancy Graves has more upon his conscience than he has yet revealed. He is too conveniently placed, too eager to direct suspicion. At that instant, a knock sounded upon the door, and Mrs. Hudson admitted a boy in a page's livery, bearing a sealed note. Holmes broke it open and read aloud. "Come at once. Miss Averill begs for your counsel. She cannot bear the weight of silence. Averill House, without delay." We lost no time. The cab carried us swiftly through the gathering dusk. Miss Averill received us in the library, her eyes red with weeping, her hands clasped tightly. She rose as we entered, her composure fragile. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "I could not rest. My uncle's confession has spared me in one sense, yet it leaves me exposed in another. I must tell you there is more. The night before Mr. Fisk's death I overheard a quarrel not between him and the curate, but between him and Graves. The sexton demanded money. He said he knew of irregularities and would speak of them. Mr. Fisk refused, declaring that he would confess all to the bishop and have done with concealment. Graves left in fury. I thought it only a servant's insolence. Now I see—" Holmes inclined his head gravely. "You confirm what I suspected." Graves seized the ledger, knowing it to be both weapon and shield. When Sir Reginald committed his rash act, Graves found opportunity. He made the scene more damning, implicated the curate, and carried away the very proof the vicar had feared. It was a parasite feeding upon tragedy. Her eyes filled with tears. "Then my uncle, was he but a pawn?" "No," Holmes said softly. "He was the author of the blow, but another hand has written the footnotes. The truth is often layered, Miss Averill, as Scripture itself. One may preach mercy, another sacrifice, yet both pages belong to the same book." She wept silently, and Holmes turned away, his features set. "Come, Watson, we must see Lestrade before Graves scents danger. If my reasoning is sound, the missing ledger will be found not upon the river's bottom, but hidden in some nook of the sexton's dwelling, and when it is produced the parish will learn that a man may protect honour with violence, or pursue gain with treachery, but in the end both paths converge in the dock." As we departed into the night once more, I felt a chill deeper than the fog upon my face. The case had seemed concluded, the murderer unmasked, yet Holmes's relentless logic revealed new abysses beneath the surface. The Bible, the keys, the letters, each was but one verse in a darker litany whose final refrain had yet to be spoken. The hansom bore us at a sharp pace toward Scotland Yard, Holmes sitting bolt upright, his fingers drumming lightly on the sill, in that peculiar rhythm which always betrayed the rapidity of his thoughts. He had spoken scarcely a word since leaving Miss Averill, save to mutter once that our sexton keeps a tighter hold on his secrets than upon his broom. I knew better than to press him, for when his mind ran upon a scent, it was best left to follow its course, uninterrupted. Lestrade received us in his office with a fatigue that verged upon irritation. "If you've come to unpick your own work, Holmes," he began testily, "I warn you, the Yard has no taste for endless revisions. Sir Reginald has confessed. It is as neat a case as I've had in years." Holmes drew himself up with a flash of his old severity. "Neat, perhaps, Inspector, but not true. Your baronet struck the blow, yes, but the hand that carried off the ledger and embroidered the scene belongs to another. If you would preserve your reputation, you will act before the trail grows cold." Lestrade scoffed. "Oh, you cannot mean to shift suspicion yet again. Who now, then? The sexton?" "Precisely," Holmes replied, and in that single word was such certainty that Lestrade blinked despite himself. Holmes continued, swiftly. "Graves quarrelled with the vicar the night before his death, demanding money to hold his tongue. He alone had opportunity to remove the ledger after the murder. He smeared the Bible further to direct suspicion, where it suited him. And I will wager the ledger lies at this moment not far from his bedstead. Shall we test my theory, Inspector?" Grumbling, but unwilling to risk the chance of being proved a fool, Lestrade summoned 2 constables, and together we drove to the sexton's lodgings near the churchyard. The dwelling was a low, mean house tucked against the wall of the graveyard itself, the garden thick with nettles. The air within was sour with damp and stale drink. Graves met us at the door, his eyes narrowing when he saw Holmes at our head. "What now?" he demanded. "Haven't you hounded enough honest men?" "Honest men do not barter silence," Holmes said coldly. "Step aside." Lestrade and his men swept through the rooms, Holmes directing them with the precision of one who already knew what they would find. It took little time. Beneath a loose floorboard in the small back room, wrapped in sacking, lay the missing ledger, its clasp still locked. Lestrade lifted it triumphantly. Graves blanched, his lips working soundlessly. Holmes regarded him with that piercing gaze which could strip pretense from a soul. "You played a clever game, Graves, but you lacked imagination enough to foresee that truth leaves its print in the smallest detail. You sought to profit from tragedy, and in doing so betrayed yourself. You quarrelled with the vicar, you threatened exposure, and when Sir Reginald's rash act gave you the stage, you seized it, but you overreached. The pricket wax, the smear too artful, the ledger vanished yet unopened, all betray the parasite feeding upon another's crime." The sexton's defiance crumbled. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I never struck him," he muttered. "By the saints, I never raised the blow, but I thought, why shouldn't I profit? He'd called me worthless, threatened to have me dismissed outright. When I found him lying there, I thought it my chance to make something of his fall. The clerk would take the blame, or the curate. No one would look to me. I took the ledger, thinking to sell it, and I made the scene darker to cast the more suspicion." Holmes inclined his head. "Your honesty now will not erase your dishonesty then, but it spares you the rope. You are a thief and a deceiver, Graves, not a murderer. The law will know the distinction." Lestrade snapped the ledger shut and signalled his men. "Take him. The court will decide what punishment suits." As Graves was led away, Holmes's expression softened only slightly. He turned to me. "There, Watson, the last shadow dispelled. Sir Reginald's sin was born of passion, of misjudged love. Graves's was of avarice. Both men exploited the same night, but in different keys. One sought to protect, the other to profit, and poor Fisk, in the midst of it, paid with his life." We returned at last to Baker Street, the fog lifting faintly to reveal the first timid stars above. Holmes threw himself into his chair with the air of a man who has driven a thorn from his mind. He filled his pipe, and as the smoke curled about him, he spoke more gently than before. "Do you see, Watson, how a crime may wear two faces? The Yard would have been content with one, but truth demands both. A confession is not an end but a signpost, pointing us to deeper ground. And so it proved here. Sir Reginald's guilt was genuine, yet without Graves the picture was incomplete. To leave it half-drawn would have been a betrayal of reason. I could not but admire the unflagging rigour of his mind, though I confess my thoughts turned with pity toward Miss Averill, whose future was now clouded by the double shame of uncle and parish alike. Holmes seemed to read my thought, for he added, "She is young, Watson. She will endure. Suffering refines as often as it destroys, and if her art survives, it may yet be her salvation." The clock on the mantel struck midnight. The city beyond our window was quiet, its roar hushed for a few hours' respite. Holmes sat in silence, the firelight playing upon his features, the Bible verse echoing still between us. I desired mercy, and not sacrifice. After a long pause, he tapped his pipe upon the grate and said softly, almost to himself, "If only men would heed the text as it stands and not twist it to suit their passions, my profession would be a barren one indeed." With that, he turned his chair to the fire, and I, recognizing the case at last complete, took up my pen to record it, my heart heavy with the weight of its human folly, yet once more astonished by the clarity with which Sherlock Holmes had drawn light from the thickest fog. The days that followed were heavy with the echo of the trial's impending spectacle. The newspapers devoured every morsel, their headlines alternating between lurid fascination with the baronet's fall and righteous outrage at the sexton's treachery. Yet within the quiet refuge of Baker Street, Holmes moved with a detachment that bordered upon indifference. He had little taste for public clamour once the riddle itself was solved. To him, the case was a completed theorem, the proof neat and irrefutable, and the noise of society merely the dust that rose when truth's stone struck the ground. One evening, as I set aside the Times, Holmes laid down his violin and regarded me with the faintest of smiles. "You are still troubled, Watson. You think of Miss Averill." I admitted it freely. The girl's pallid face at the service, her composure shattered by her uncle's downfall, haunted my thoughts. "She was innocent of all but trust," I said. "Yet her life is stained by two men's sins, one of passion, the other of greed. It is a cruel fate." Holmes inclined his head. "Cruel, yes, but not final. I have written privately to the Home Secretary, explaining the precise nature of Sir Reginald's act. His honour will be condemned, but his niece must not suffer more than the inevitable shadow. As for Graves, his own confession and the recovery of the ledger will suffice to show the parish where guilt lies. Time, Watson, has a talent for dulling scandal into history." I was silent, moved by this unexpected tenderness in him, though he quickly veiled it beneath his habitual reserve. After a pause, he said, "You remarked once that the verse chosen was a mockery. I desired mercy and not sacrifice. Yet and it served its true purpose. Sir Reginald gave sacrifice where mercy was needed, and for that he fell. But mercy may still be shown to those who remain, the niece, the parish, even the curate who suffered suspicion unjustly. If one life was ended and two ruined, at least another may yet be redeemed." The firelight cast long shadows across the room. I reflected upon the strange symmetry of the case, the baronet's crime hidden beneath Scripture, the sexton's theft hidden beneath disorder, each man attempting to twist truth into a weapon. Yet both had been drawn inevitably into Holmes's net, their fabrications unravelled by the same relentless logic. Holmes rose and moved to the window, where the lamplight of Baker Street gleamed faintly through the fog. "You see, Watson, there is no puzzle so intricate that the truth does not leave a seam. Men imagine themselves clever when they embellish their crimes with drama, the blood upon the Bible, the keys in the river, but artifice is the very signal of deceit. Strip away the ornament and the naked fact reveals itself." He turned, the sharpness of his gaze softened now by weariness. "It is always so. When men mistake sacrifice for mercy, they build their own ruin." He resumed his chair, lighting his pipe with a languid motion. For a time we smoked in silence, the crackle of the fire the only sound. At length I ventured, "And what of you, Holmes? Do you not weary of these tragedies, these endless proofs of human folly?" He gave a short laugh, though not without warmth. "Weary? Perhaps, but only as a chess player. Wearies of opponents who repeat the same errors. Yet the game is the thing, Watson, to see the design where others see only confusion. That is my stimulant. Without it, the world would be intolerably dull. And besides," he added, with a glint of irony, "were mankind suddenly to embrace mercy without sacrifice, where should I be? Likely reduced to composing monographs on tobacco ash." I could not help but smile at this, though I knew beneath his jest lay a truth he would never admit, that even in his detachment he cared more deeply for justice than he professed. Thus ended the affair of the blood-stained Bible, a case that began with scripture and blood, and concluded with the revelation of love distorted into violence, and greed that festered in another man's shadow. In its unfolding, I saw once more the peculiar genius of Sherlock Holmes, whose vision could pierce through the fog of London and of the human heart alike. And as I set down my pen, I thought again of the verse, not as Sir Reginald had twisted it, but as it was meant, a call to mercy above all else. It seemed to me that even Holmes, for all his cool logic, had in some measure heeded it that night when he spoke for Miss Averil's future. For in the end, though sacrifice had been made, mercy, too, had found its place. And that perhaps was the truest resolution of all.